Okay, Chairman, we're now live on YouTube. You can go ahead.
Thank you. Okay, so welcome to this virtual meeting of the Eastern Committee. My name is Councillor Richard Cole, and I am the chairman of this committee. So I'd like to start by confirming those present are members of the committee. Is that the case, Georgina?
All the members are present.
Thank you. And this evening I'm supported by a number of officers. First, I'll welcome Georgina Hall, who's a new Democratic Services officer who's clerking this meeting.
Hello.
But apart from her, we have Lewis Jones, planning lawyer, Beth Howland Smith, development manager, Marie Clark, area team leader, Kate Edwards, principal planning officer, Tracy Farthing, planning officer, Lara Davison, planning officer, and Fiona Cameron, who's running the electronics tonight. So members and officers, please use the hand raise function within Zoom to indicate you wish to speak, and mute your microphone when you are not speaking. And of course, as always, please keep your statements brief and to the point. And we'll be timing speeches, and there will be a sounding alarm if there's more than 4 minutes long. So as normal, if any members in the committee lose their connection temporarily, we will pause to allow them to rejoin the meeting. And if the webcast stream fails, then we'll have to adjourn until that's working. In that case, we'll move on to item 1. Apologies for absence and substitutions. Georgina?
I've not received any.
Minutes of the last meeting. Can the committee please confirm the minutes of the meeting held on the 23rd of September, which have been published and are on the council's website?
Agreed.
Agreed. Thank you. Georgina, this is item 3, declarations of interest. Have we received any declarations of interest?
No, none.
Meeting? Councillors, does anyone wish to declare any interest in items on the agenda tonight? Georgina, are there any questions from members of the public?
There's no questions.
Any questions from members of the council?
No, none.
Beth, are there any updates to government guidance or legislation that you wish to bring to our attention?
I don't know of any.
Beth, are there any from your side? Is Beth there?
Yes, Chair. Sorry, I am. I was on mute.
Yeah.
Nothing this evening, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, we'll move on to applications, and just a note that the polling feature within Zoom has been set up, so votes on the items can be taken by general assent or using the polling. It'll be using the polling. And if a recorded vote is required, it'll be done by roll call as per normal. So the first, okay, sorry, can Beth, do you have can you declare which applications have been decided under delegated powers since last time?
Yes, thank you, Chair. We have, since the last meeting, determined WA 2020-0941, that's White Hart Cottage in Ewhurst, that was permitted, and WA
I can't hear very well.
Beth, yeah, Beth, we can't, unfortunately, we turn away, we can't hear you. Can you start again, please?
Oh, beg your pardon, and apologies. We've got WA 2020-0941 White Hart Cottage, which we approved, and WA 2020-1339 39 Admiral Way, which we also approved. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Okay, we'll move now to applications subject to public speaking. And the first is WA 2020-1128 land at Gadsbridge Lane, Ewhurst. Proposal erection of a dwelling and associated works. So Kate, is Kate here actually? I didn't see.
Yes, I am. Yes, hi,
Yes.
Chair.
Could you please provide us with the briefing?
Yes, certainly, Chair. Georgina, would it be possible?
I'll share your screen.
Brilliant, thank you. Would it be possible to go on, if you go on slideshow at the top and then view from on the orange bar at the top, and then from current slide, that should take us through all of them with the full screen. Brilliant, thank you. The current application before us is for the erection of a dwelling and associated works on the proposed site at Gadbridge Lane. Thank you. Thanks. And here we can see a location plan with the site outlined in red. As you can see, there is a dwelling to the immediate north of the application site, which is Sunset Cottage, and a dwelling to the immediate south of the application site, Gadbridge Farm, although these dwellings are outside of the settlement boundary. You can see in this image also Cranley Road, which runs to the north of the application site there. And here we can see some photos of the site. In the top left-hand image there, you can see a photo taken from within the application site in an existing open field area looking towards Sunset Cottage, which adjoins to the north. The next image at the top is of the existing stables building, which occupied the northern half of the site. The image in the bottom left-hand corner is of an existing access, which is how the site is currently accessed. It's however noted that this existing access isn't included within the application site and would be separate from it, with a new access created within the existing hedgerow, which you can just see there to the left of that image. And in the bottom right-hand corner there, you can see the view, again looking towards Sunset Cottage with the stables in the foreground. Thank you. And here we can see a proposed site plan. And as you can see, the single dwelling which is proposed would be a significant detached dwelling, which would have 4 bedrooms, and it would be centralised within the plot, which would include both the land adjacent to Gadbridge Farm and the land of the existing stables block. And here you can see the elevations proposed for the building. As you can see, it would have a semi-cat slide roof form with dormer windows and a false gable within the roof, and would be very much in the Surrey vernacular. And here we can see how that would fit within the existing street scene. Probably the most comprehensive image to view within this plan is the bottom schematic there, which shows the proposed dwelling at the centre with the existing property at Sunset Cottages to the right and Gadbridge Farm to the left. And here we can see some proposed floor plans, which, as you can see, would have what you'd expect as a typical layout, with an open plan living space alongside some reception rooms to the ground floor and 4 bedrooms within the first floor level. And finally, as you will know from reading the report, there have been quite a significant number of applications on the site in recent years. Many have, which have all been refused, and I've just included here for comparison the proposed site plans for those refused applications. So should you wish to come back to this during the discussion, we can see it here. But in essence, the image to the immediate left-hand side is the proposed dwelling within the current application. The image in the centre there is of the most recent application, which was also submitted this year and was refused. As you can see there, one dwelling was proposed in a more cramped plot with the existing stables retained to the side. And the image you can see on the right there is the previous application, where 2 dwellings were proposed side by side within the plot. and to confirm the recommendation is to grant planning permission subject to the conditions informatives which have been set out in the report. I also note that there was one update sheet circulated earlier today which just clarified an error in my report which had been published. In my report I referred to the existing stables buildings as being outside of the site, but that's incorrect. They are within the site, although the existing access, as we saw there, is not within the application site. In addition to that update sheet, which I put out earlier today, following further consideration in relation to the preservation of the hedgerow to the front of the application site, I considered that it would be prudent to add an additional condition to the schedule which you have before you. So that would be recommended condition, and I can share the detailed wording of this with you, Chair, and members of Democratic Services. But in essence, I think there's a need for a landscaping condition which would require details of landscaping to be approved and the approved details to be maintained for a period of 5 years, and which specifically refers to the protection, rather the retention of the existing hedgerow. And that's everything from me. Thank you.
That would be condition 20, presumably the new one. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. Yes.
Okay. Right. Thank you very much. We'll move on to the two speakers and then Councillor Henry as ward councillor. So this first speaker is Alison Johnston, who I think I saw online. So, Ms. Johnston, if you wish to speak, please go ahead. You have 4 minutes to make your point.
Thank you. I'm here tonight on behalf of members of the community who put pen to paper to object to this planning application, to talk to the issues raised in the officer's report, and to look at why this planning application should actually be refused. 4 months ago, the application for a single dwelling on this site was refused as it would harm the intrinsic character and beauty of the countryside. The latest officer's report states that the development would not lead to harm to the intrinsic character and beauty of the countryside. So what's changed in 4 months? It comes down to interpretation, to nuances, and that's what I'd like to look at. Firstly, the report states that given the evenly balanced spacing to either side of the proposed new dwelling, the plot would have a more spacious appearance, that significant areas of undeveloped land would remain to either side of the proposed dwelling. And if you look at the location plan on page 1 of the report, and as we've just seen, that certainly appears to be the case. Unfortunately, when you look at the site plan in section 4 and the street scene, which we've just looked at, you'll see that the significant area of undeveloped land to the right of the house actually has a double garage on it. Not only that, but from the previous application, in moving from the left to the right side of the property, the garage has actually morphed into a bigger structure. And I'm sure you'd agree that the omission of a double garage in the deliberations around how spacious the site is actually quite a big nuance. Secondly, size. According to the officer's report, the current proposal represents a greater street frontage than the previous site area, and the house itself is 3 metres wider than the submission refused 4 months ago, but it has less impact. That's a nuance that seems counterintuitive, and if anything, should actually reinforce grounds for refusal. There are other nuances in the report, the stabling Kate's just picked up on, but also that there's no current vehicular access and existing accesses across adjoining land. Well, that land is actually owned by the applicant, and excluding the current access to the site is a decision that has been made by the applicant and their design team. In their covering letter, the design team, Carlton, point to the fact that the refusal 4 months ago was based on a decision made in 1989, some 30 years ago, and that things have changed. There have been changes to the west side of the lane over the years, but those changes have been sympathetic to the setting and limited to the repurposing of outbuildings as domestic dwellings. As you come down the lane from the cricket green, You have Bilden's Farm, circa 1500, absolutely beautiful building, grade 2 listed. Then on the bend, you have Groom's Barn, as the name suggests, a barn conversion, early 18th century, grade 2 listed. Next, you have the farm cottage, the footprint of which is evident of maps of Gadbridge Farm, dating back again to the 18th century. Then Gadbridge Farm itself, mid-1500s, grade 2 listed. And next, our new build, Sunset Cottage. And I say our new build because it's all relative. Sunset Cottage was built within the curtilage of Gadbridge Farm in 1830. So changes in the last 30 years? In essence, the footprint of the west side of Gadbridge Lane, from Bilden's Farm down to Sunset Cottage, hasn't changed in the last 190 years. That's not a nuance, that's not an interpretation, that's a fact. The unchanged footprint is what gives the lane its distinctive character. The unchanged footprint is what gives the lane its rural feel. So please leave it unchanged, say no, and refuse this planning application. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next speaker is John Gaines, who is the applicant. Mr. Gaines, you have your 4 minutes to speak.
Good evening, councillors. I've been the owner of this site for 32 years, which we have used for stabling, a builder's yard and a log store. The Ewhurst Parish Council have not objected to this proposal, but stated if it were passed, could I clarify 4 items? I have now emailed these to the parish on the 19th of October's meeting. This site had 50 metres of road frontage. I would like to show you a street scene showing the adequate spacing to the neighbours either side. I won't do that actually because it didn't come out very well earlier. There is approximately 25 to 30 metres distance between each dwelling. Significant areas of undeveloped land remain either side of the new proposed dwelling. This is stated in the Principal Planner's report. The dwelling will enhance the character of the countryside with its art and crafts design and will fit in with the eclectic mix of Gadbridge Lane. This includes Sussex barn hip roof ends, open eaves to encourage the nesting of house martins, swallows, swifts, front gable with timber beams and rendered panels. Hipped roofs may be put on the dormers if need be. Open porch with low slung roof supported by oak posts on top of brick piers. The garage carport to be clad in shiplap timber boarding where needed. Handmade clay tiles on all roof coverings. A minimum of 6 trees will be planted during construction. Hedges of a mixed variety will be planted on new boundaries to the west and north side. The roadside hedge will remain as perfect screening. Later on, it may be cut and laid to give it a new lease of life. Surrey Wildlife Trust confirmed that the ecological report was sufficient, therefore considered acceptable with regards to impact on wildlife. To conclude, I will be proud to build this beautiful home with adequate spacing, sufficient land all around the home, arts and craft designs, 50 metres of road frontage. After all, it is only one home. The site will be improved dramatically from what is now a builder's yard and log store. Thank you for your time, and I feel that this should meet to your approval. Thank you.
Thank you. So finally, Councillor Henry, of course, you have your 4 minutes as ward councillor, and you can come back at the end of the debate and sum up. So do you want to start your 4 minutes, please?
Thank you very much, Chairman. Good evening. I'm Val Henry. I'm the Waverley Borough Councillor for Ewhurst. I requested this application be called in. There's been a lot of interest in this, and I wanted to ensure that those parties who could be affected by this new build be given the opportunity to air their views. The officer's report is very good, but I wanted to give a little bit more back infill, as it were. Many of the councillors will be familiar with this site. Gabbridge Lane is an ancient thoroughfare. There is no lighting, no pavements. There are 3 listed buildings, and there's quite a lot of open space, and the open space runs off into fields and across to the ancient woodland, which becomes part of the conservation area, and it's part of the village settlement. We have seen over the last 5 years 3 applications for this particular site, always different and all refused. Planning history is a material consideration, and planning policy RE1 does not waver. In this is enshrined the impact on the character of the countryside, that it be recognised and safeguarded. And really, it's wholly upon us as guardians of our environment that we do get it right. The design, scale, removal of the ancient hedgerow, the loss of the open space, the field on the corner of Gabbridge Lane and Cranley Road will make a significant difference to what is planned. Further, the creation of the 43-metre splays to enable the new access to the new dwelling, that is real cause for concern. All this does not fit my interpretation of RE1, that the countryside be recognised and safeguarded. I don't get to vote, but wanted to express my take on the Ewhurst residents' concerns for this development. Thank you, and I look forward to your discussions. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Henry. Okay, we move on to the debate. Any comments from members present? Councillor Costa.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I simply want to clarify 2 points, if I can, just at this stage. One of the things I always try to do with these applications, I'm sure other members do, is I like to look through the whole list of objections received and satisfy myself that they've been addressed in the officer's report. There were 2 things that I just want to be 100% clear on. There was a stated objection to the ancient hedgerow. I just want to check whether an ancient hedgerow has any planning significance or designation, or whether we are simply talking about a hedgerow that has been there for a long time, and that we are therefore to have due regard to that in our consideration. So that's my first question. My second one is that there are stated objections to the fact that this is contrary, quote, to the Ewhurst neighbourhood plan. I've not come across this before, and I wonder if the planning officers could just tell us whether there is a Ewhurst neighbourhood plan, and if so, what its status is. Is it made and accepted, or are we is it something that's in embryonic stage, and do we have to have regard to it in any way? Because I didn't see it listed in the list of planning policies and things as we would normally do if it were Godalming or Farnham or something of that order. So if I could just have clarification on those 2 questions at this stage, Chairman, I'd be most grateful.
Kate, can you answer those 2 points?
Yes, certainly. Thank you very much, Councillor Cotter. In relation to the hedgerow, there is no formal designation of the hedgerow. I'm not aware of how old it is, but it's clearly been in situ for some time. But in terms of our assessment of it, the tree officers have found that there aren't any veteran trees or trees of significant merit within it. In relation to the Ewhurst neighbourhood plan, there is currently a draft neighbourhood plan, but because of the stage that it is in the consultation process, it's not at a stage yet where we would give it material weight in decision making, although it's obviously useful to understand the direction of travel for Ewhurst as a settlement at this stage. Thank you.
That's helpful. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Townsend.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm a little bit shocked by this application because it's outside of the settlement boundary of Ewhurst. It's not within the boundary. It's also on land that is not an infill of a garden or anything. It's agricultural or grazing land. And also it does have a hedgerow there, which is which at this moment in time it has been there for many years, and at this moment in time, according to government guidelines, you know, its length means that it does qualify for protection. Its location means that it does qualify for protection. The only thing that hasn't been established is its importance, and if it's at least 30 years old and meets one of these criteria, well, it is over 30 years old, and the criteria was that it's part of a, is it part of a field system? Then it could well be. So I'm a little bit confused. Just because it hasn't been officially designated as an ancient hedgerow doesn't mean that it doesn't warrant protection. And I'm a bit surprised that we're looking at putting a house on outside the settlement boundary of Ewhurst that is also not a garden landfill. It's not an agricultural building. I think one of the speakers mentioned about a barn that had been changed, which does come under, obviously, and can be done under the NPPF. So I really would like to establish, why we are looking at this. And also, I can't obviously say enough that this would establish a precedent. And although, you know, precedents are tossed around and we say, oh, well, it doesn't, any application has to be looked at in its own merits. But actually, we all know that precedents are set, and that's something that developers tell us all the time. And we see it in planning applications as well. So whilst the actual style of the house, I think that, that yes, in the Surrey vernacular and that, but the actual location, it does really, really concern me, and I'd really like to know why it's come forward, why we're looking at it. Thank you.
Kate, do you want to try and answer those points?
Yes, certainly. Thank you for the questions, Councillor Townsend. I think the crux of the matter with the decision on this application is, as I've said in the report, a fairly finely balanced issue, but the crux is the impact of the proposal on the intrinsic character and beauty of the countryside, given that it's outside of the settlement boundary. The proposal which is before us is for a single dwelling within a really quite spacious plot. And specifically because of the morphology of the surrounding area on the eastern side of, the western side of Gadbridge Lane, that it would appear appropriate within that urban form. So there is Sunset Cottage, as you saw, to the north, Gadbridge Farm to the south, and that does that form of development does continue on along the same side of Gadbridge Lane to the south. So in essence, because of the unique siting of the building, I don't, in my opinion, consider it to be harmful to the character of the countryside. Notwithstanding that, it's obviously a matter for the committee to make their own decision in relation to. In relation to the hedgerow issue you raised, Councillor Townsend, all I can advise there is that an assessment of the merit of the hedgerow for retention has been undertaken by our tree officers, who didn't consider that it represented a constraint on development. And finally, in terms of the issue of the sort of the current status of the land, you're correct that it's not residential curtilage currently. I would define the land probably as being equestrian, given the consent for the existing stables there. Thank you.
Councillor Darcy.
Yeah, I wanted to draw our attention to page 16, the first paragraph, which is quoting from the inspector when the previous application was refused on appeal. Now, as far as I can see in that paragraph, nothing has changed. So the reasons he gave, or she, for refusing haven't changed, particularly the bit where it says that the frontage is not a relatively small gap. The proposal would introduce another gap in the hedgerow, which this will do, and a further building and domestication on the west side of the land would in fact tilt the balance between a frontage which at present is predominantly rural and one which would become predominantly built up. Now, I don't see any change in this proposal from that one, which was refused. So I'm really puzzled as to why this has come to us. My second point is that condition 9 refers to the preliminary ecological appraisal, and it suggests that this should be implemented fully in accordance with the measures identified in this proposal. But there are a number of measures, section 5.2, 5.3 and 5.4, some of which are recommendations, some of which are not so strongly worded, and I wondered if it referred to all of them or just section 5.2. Thank you.
Kate, can you comment on that? I know it's a difficult area. I mean, well, it is the core area of this application, I think.
Yes, certainly. So in relation to the previous inspector's comments, I would agree that as we heard from the objector speaking to the case, that the built form of the surrounding area hasn't changed substantially in recent years, notwithstanding that there is a stables on site now. But I think the key change from the inspector's decision is in relation to the wider planning context. So since that decision, there has been the adoption of the National Planning Policy Framework as a major changing point to how all planning applications are assessed. And there's also been obviously the adoption of our local plan part 1, the strategic policies. So in essence, those changes outline a slight alteration in movement and consideration of how proposals in the countryside are considered. The current legislation requires that a harm is to be demonstrated if permission is to be refused. And in essence, given, as I said earlier, given the spacious qualities of the site and the fact that significant areas of land would remain to either side of the property, I think now the proposal is at the point of balance there, where there wouldn't be a resultant harm to the countryside, as the inspector described in that 1989 decision. And in relation to the ecological appraisal, the wording there referring to section 5.2 was taken directly from Surrey Wildlife Trust. As I read it, the key sort of definable recommendations of the report were within that section, but notwithstanding that, if there was an objection to it referring specifically to that objection, that section only, that could potentially be altered if there were outstanding concerns. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Dinas.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and good evening, everybody. I try not to repeat what Councillor Townsend has said, because many of the points are very valid, other than to add it's also countryside beyond the green belt. So I'll just add that one point. To me, pages 14, 15 and 16 are the key pages. There's no doubt about that. Page 14 gives the reason for refusal, policy RE1, which Councillor Henry raised. Top of page 15, it talks about actually this is a larger building. So it's, I think it's about 1.7 metres in depth larger and 3 metres in width. So it's an extra 10 foot. So it's quite a big increase. But it's the second paragraph, and I think this ties into what Councillor Darcy said on page 16. Second paragraph says the test is whether, having regard to the changes, the current proposal has overcome the objections to the previously refused scheme and is acceptable in its own right. At this moment, I haven't heard anything that says to me that these objections have been overcome. I will, of course, listen to any of my other colleagues who may have a view about that. Just one other point I'd like to raise, and that's about the access and the admission of the access. I accept it's shown as condition 2, but it is actually very difficult when you're considering an application and not really knowing what the visibility displays are going to be, what the access is going to be. I just find that very, very strange. So at the moment, I'm minded not to support the officers, but I will listen to my colleagues for any views they have. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Chair. Could I please ask Georgina and Kate to work together so that we could see the actual location plan again, because I want to talk to that, please.
So that's on slide 2, if it's possible to bring that up at all.
As an aside, I'd just like to say, please don't start the clock yet.
Yes, we're waiting for you to start talking.
May I start now, Chair?
Go ahead.
Right, you can see the location outlined in red. I know the area quite well and often travel along Gadbridge Lane. And I'd just like to say, Councillor Dinas, it is not the same as the previous applications, and we are judging this application on its own merit. Now, if you look at the situation on Gadbridge Lane, I just wanted to point out that the buildings to the right, which are facing, which are on the east side. So the back of the property we're talking about is facing down the field, which is owned by the applicant, which faces west. And if you've studied the contour lines, the houses opposite on the east side, the other side of the road, are actually higher. So I think I've read somewhere in this application that they're feeling that they would be overlooked, and I've failed to see how that can be. Sunset Cottage, yes, it comes right up to the boundary, and the part that comes up to the boundary, I believe, is a garage which has now got a link, so it could be being used as a dwelling. So we are not looking at the other refused applications, we're looking at this one, and I can see it's so different because there is open land both sides. I appreciate what Councillor for you has said about the fact that she believes that it's going to destroy the look of the lane, but this lane is always, you know, it's always been there, I agree on that, but an awful lot of the properties, especially opposite, are pretty new. I mean, they're within the last 50 years, I would think. And the development, which is more or less opposite, Chip Chase and others in a little area of development called the Paddocks, are very new. And then I'd like to talk about the splaying that of the exits. Well, I don't know many exits that come off Gadbridge Lane that have very wide splayed exits. So I can't see that that's a point to make. I like the idea, I like the design of the new proposed dwelling, and I think it's a great improvement and will fit in very well in this situation. And I am going to vote to support this application. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Reid. Councillor Goodridge. Councillor Goodridge, are you there?
Still muted.
Let's try again. Thank you, Chairman. A lot of what I was going to say has already been said, and I agree that it's sort of pages 14 to 16, which are the crucial parts of it, including the inspector's remarks in the 1989 or 1990 appeal. This is a matter of judgment and is, in my book, finely balanced. The one thing that pushes me over the edge to, at the moment, feel that I should refuse the application is that the fact that the existing access is not being used and a new access is being made. That, in my book, just does change the character of the lane, and it is something which is just one step too far. I accept the building looks lovely and so on and so forth, but we do have to take into account where it is, where in Newhurst it is being put. Finally, looking at the last paragraph of impact on the proposal, i.e. the penultimate paragraph on page 16, I just wonder if there's a Freudian slip in the last sentence, which says, accordingly, the proposal is considered to be contrary to policy RE1 of the local plan, part 1, 2018. So having read that, I assume the officers felt that this was not acceptable. But I think there's a knot that's somewhere missing in that sentence, unless I've misread it. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you. Kate, can you, on that last point, can you clarify, we're at the bottom of page 16, I think the last paragraph of the section, which starts on the previous page.
Yes, right. I haven't got to that section, but yes, I'm afraid it must have been an error. It's not correct that, you know, it was my take that it wasn't acceptable.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Follows.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you, Chair. I was just wondering if officers could put the document back up on the screen again for two reasons. Firstly, just to go back to the same image that Councillor Reid requested, and then just after that to the diagram that you put up about with the different permissions. So just for my own benefit, because I freely acknowledge in this particular case I don't know this site particularly well, and I'm defaulting to the comments of members from the east particularly. But the other side of the lane there, are those all houses already? If I could just ask that first before I carry on.
Yes, certainly, it's correct that they are houses.
So in terms of the horse does seem to have slightly bolted in terms of building outside the settlement boundary if those houses are already there. And do the access to those houses go onto that lane, or do they go out the other side?
The majority of the houses are accessed from the lane, yes. But just to clarify, the settlement boundary of Ewhurst runs down the middle of the road in effect. So the opposite side of the road is within the settlement boundary, but the application site.
So, and I appreciate you. I'm sure you appreciate where I'm coming from. This is that one of those settlement boundaries that moved to accommodate a situation that developed where the houses were built, and effectively the line moved to accommodate them over time.
I'm not personally aware of the history of the settlement boundary, but that has happened in some villages because they are reviewed regularly when new plans are adopted.
Okay. I just curious about that one. If you could just then go to the I think it's the slide afterwards. Either way, it's the one that compares the different permissions that were refused. I just would like to see that again, if that's possible.
And I believe that's slide 8, Georgina. Thank you.
Thanks, Kate. Okay. So, I mean, it's certainly the case that I would have the same concerns as Councillor Dinas regarding the access, not because, I mean, in practice, if there's permission for a stables, then surely there's permission for having some level of access coming out to it anyway, of probably comparable size. They just haven't done it now, I assume. I wouldn't necessarily, I would hope that Surrey would go and do that in person so that it was done sensibly, rather than it being a desktop exercise to assess what was reasonable. But in terms of the actual increase in harm, I mean, at the moment, I'm minded to agree with Councillor Reid that the space around it is certainly different. But can I just confirm that the point for us here is that we are able to make a judgment as to whether that harm has been mitigated sufficiently, both with the change in the design and also with the changes in the NPPF over the intervening, 30 years since 1989. Would that be correct, Kate?
Yes, that's correct. It's for the committee to make a judgment.
Thank you. That's all from me.
Councillor Sadler.
Right. I've just got one question. Gadbrook Lane, is that an adopted road or is it a private road? Who maintains it?
I understand that it is an adopted road, but I can just check the highways comments to confirm that. So I can do that whilst you continue.
Yes, we'll come back to that later. Thank you. If there are no other speakers who wish to speak the first time, then we'll go back to Councillor Townsend briefly, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for allowing me to speak again. I think, as Kate said, the settlement boundary does go down the centre of the road, and I would just say, in LPP1, that settlement boundary that's where it was going, and that's what we decided in Local Plan Part 1. I would also just like to point out that the Surrey County Council Highways report seems to refer to a completely different plan number. So I've got no idea whether or not this plan number, the Surrey Highways comments are actually applicable to this particular application and to this plan. So previously, I know that we thought that the access was going to be in the existing access, and Surrey Highways referred to plans 3325/SL-02 revision A, which doesn't seem to correspond to what we're looking at now. So I'm very concerned that actually we haven't got the correct access and we haven't got Surrey Highways' correct comments on this at all. But this is, it is actually outside the settlement boundary and on land which is for, well, you said horse grazing, but agricultural land. So I'm still, the intrinsic value of the beauty and intrinsic value, well, in June, we thought that it was important to protect that. In June 2020, and just a couple of months later, with no changes within the NPPF at all, we're now saying that it's not worth protecting. And if you go down this lane, it is extremely rural with no pavement, and it is extremely narrow as well. It does feel very, very rural. I can't stress that enough. So this would change that feeling completely, that character completely. Thank you. Thank you for allowing me to come back.
And if I could just possibly clarify, Chair, thank you, Councillor Townsend. In relation to the highway, the plan highways refers to, the plan on file for this case is the SL02, which is referred to, which shows the access, which is at the bottom of the plan list as it's viewed on the portal. So I don't think there is an issue there, and I can also confirm that the highways comments were received specifically in relation to this application rather than the previous application. And in terms of the agricultural land issue, grazing of horses who are otherwise living in a stable and being cared for in the stable, that's not considered an agricultural use under the use class order, although it could potentially change to an agricultural use without permission. But what that means is that it's not protected by the agricultural land protection policy within the local plan. Thank you.
There's a point from Councillor Sadler. Have you be able to resolve that? Okay, we'll come back to you in a second. Councillor Higgin.
Thank you, Chair. I read the refusal from the June application, and to me the thing that stood out is that the key difference between that refusal and this one was that the June application only made use of half of the available space down this lane, leaving the possibility that there was undeveloped land that could provide a come again opportunity that would definitely have made the end result look more like the 2016 plan that was refused, so that I could see the logic of why the officers recommend approval of this when they didn't recommend approval in June. But I'm still more inclined to give weight to the inspector's comments from the 1990 application, because to the extent that you're tipping the balance between an essentially rural appearance to a built-up appearance, I think that does give us grounds to still refuse this despite the change in those circumstances. So I'm still minded to refuse. Thank you.
Councillor Cossar, do you want to come back briefly? And you've already spoken, of course.
Well, I did just ask two questions, Chairman, to clarify before I made a contribution, and I did want to listen to the debate as well. Having done so, I don't find myself really persuaded by those who are arguing that we should refuse this application. I think there is a difference, and I think that the commentary and analysis provided by our officers does explain very clearly what that difference is. And I was particularly taken by Councillor Reid's comments. If you look, and also Councillor Follows, that if you actually look at this lane, yes, it may be rural, but to suggest a house in that position, given the number of houses that have been built opposite, is somehow going to destroy all of that, is something I find quite hard to take on board in any real sense. There have been some marginal comments about the access, but I do think they are quite marginal, frankly. And this is one where it is finely balanced. I think it is very difficult, but ultimately I am persuaded by the arguments of our officers. I think the analysis is sound, and I think we should support the recommendation in front of us.
Thank you. Councillor Reid, you have spoken before. Do you have a brief remark to add, please?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to say that if any of us drove along Gadbridge Lane, which is used as a little rat run between the road that goes down to Horsham and the road which is called Cranley Road, you would never think it was in a rural setting at all. There are houses along the whole of the sort of 30 metres, and 300 metres rather, they come right up to the verge, right to the edge of the road, and it doesn't seem like a rural area, one iota. So I just wanted to put that in, and to quote what the inspector has said on previous applications is totally wrong. because we're not considering those applications one bit. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Reid. So I think, Kate, we just have one remark. I think there's I'm sorry, I forgot what the question was from Councillor Sadler. Do you have the answer to that question?
Yes, I do. Yes, it was whether the road is adopted. I am not able to immediately check on my GIS to confirm myself, but I can confirm that the highways comments don't refer to it being a private road, and they would normally refer to it being a private road. So I think on that basis, we can presume that it is adopted highway.
Thank you. Okay, there are no more speakers, in which case I think we can move to the vote. So so Fiona,
Chairman,
can you start?
does the local member wish to come back?
I'm terribly sorry. Yes, you're quite right, Councillor, excuse me. Councillor Henry, you have your opportunity to sum up. I had it written on my sheet here, but I didn't read my own writing.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a few things to flag up. Gadbridge Lane is a road in Newhurst. I didn't quite catch what you were asking when you were saying was it a private road, but it's not a private road. Newhurst is a rural village, and that's expressed in the neighbourhood plan and in the allocation for sites. It's the plot that you're looking at is out of the village settlement, and the settlement details have not changed significantly in that area in a long time. I think that's all I got to add. I have to leave it open now to your judgment as councillors, and thank you for your indulgences.
Thank you, Councillor Henry. Okay, in that case, I think we can now move to the vote. So Fiona, can you start the voting machine, please?
So just to remind, this is for members of the committee, and it's the recommendation to grant permission subject to conditions and informatives, plus the additional condition that Kate mentioned in her presentation regarding landscaping condition relating to retention of the existing hedgerow specifically.
Thank you for that.
Thank you. So sharing the results for the committee, that's 9 votes in favour, 6 against and no abstentions. So that's passed.
Thank you. So we'll move on to the next item, 8.2, WA 2020-1207, 123 Binscombe. Proposal is for erection of a dwelling following relevant demolition of an unlisted bungalow within a conservation area. And Tracy Farthing is the officer. So Tracy, do you want to give us the briefing, please?
Thank you, Chairman. Before I start, I'd like to draw your attention to an update sheet that was circulated this morning. This updates relate to conditions. Condition 1, a plan number should be added. Condition 9, there's just a wording amendment. An additional condition, number 10, for the requirements of water, and an additional informative, which would be the still informative. One further condition by way of verbal update is considered prudent to the application. That would be to secure the roof lights at a 1.7 metres from the internal finished floor level. This would be condition 11. I'm just going to share my screen now to start the presentation. The proposal is for the erection of a dwelling following the demolition of an unlisted building in the conservation area. Amendments were received on the 5th of October. These relate to balcony screening only. The location plan shows the application site, outlined in red. The site straddles the conservation area, shown in blue. Adjacent to the application site is a Grade 2 listed building. The site currently features a 1970s bungalow and attached carport. Parking is available to the front and amenity space to the rear. The bungalow currently occupies almost the entire width of the plot. The proposed block plan shows the new dwelling and a modest outbuilding to the rear. Space is retained to the front for parking. The dwelling is situated within a similar footprint of the existing bungalow. It extends slightly further at the back, but retains the front build line and also introduces a larger separation distance between the dwelling and the Grade 2 listed building. The dwelling is of a modern design, featuring a cantilevered first floor at the front and a balcony at the rear. The dwelling would have a 4-metre height increase over the existing bungalow, providing accommodation over 2 floors. This results in the roof sloping away from the shared boundaries either side of the dwelling. The balcony at the rear has screening at each side, and roof lights are proposed at 1.7 metres above the finished floor levels. A condition would secure this. The proposed dwelling would be approximately 1 metre taller than its neighbour, 125 Binscombe, and 2 metres taller than 121. However, the character of Binscombe features an array of properties differing in size, scale, height, and design. This slide shows the relationship to the neighbours in relation to light. The officer's report acknowledges that light to 121's side window would be affected. However, this is a secondary window to that room. Furthermore, the existing arrangement already impedes light to this north-facing window. For the reasons set out in the officer's report, the application is recommended for approval. Thank you.
Thanks very much. We have one speaker, Mr. Nicholas, who's objecting. Mr. Nicholas, are you online?
I am indeed.
Okay, so you have 4 minutes. So please go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman. My main objection is to the loss of light to the window on the flank wall to my living room. If the application is approved, there'll be a blank wall 15 feet high, only 5 feet from this window. The window is 6 foot by 5 foot and is an essential light source to the room, which is 14 feet wide and 24 feet long, and was in the original construction when the nearest building was number 125, some 40 feet away. If obstructed, we will be forced to use electric light permanently in this room. Mr. Mariner and Mr. Beckman kindly visited me to discuss my concerns regarding the loss of light and immediately recognized the problem and offered to install Velux windows in the sloping ceiling at their expense. We were not happy with this, but allowed a modeling exercise to be carried out. But for construction reasons, it was not a solution we could pursue. The case officer has been provided with the relevant correspondence on this. The application fails to meet the test set out in Waverley's SPD rules item 7 relating to daylight and sunlight. The correct test is the 25-degree rule for vertical analysis and not the 45-degree rule for horizontal analysis referred to in the planning officer's report that justifies the recommendation to grant permission. The 25-degree rule recommends an angle of obstruction of not more than 25 degrees. In this case, the angle of obstruction would be 65 degrees to the eaves of the proposed building on my side and 41 degrees to the ridge from number 125. The onus is on the applicant to demonstrate the plans do not undermine the amenity of the neighbouring properties, and scale diagrams and sections have not, to my knowledge, been submitted to address these points. The objections submitted for this application generally are not because it is new and modern in design, but because the size and scale are inappropriate for the plot size, and it would be more appropriate for a much larger site and not a small, sensitive infill site in a conservation area. The proposal is overbearing and higher than the adjoining properties and will spoil the overall setting of the conservation area and street scene. A permission would risk setting a dangerous precedent because the council will be seen as not according with its own published SPD guidelines, which are there to safeguard the reasonable interests of occupiers of neighbouring properties. An approval would make bungalows an endangered species. The existing bungalow is in need of modernisation internally, but that is easily done. I would urge the committee to reject this application and would leave you with one thought. Imagine a wall 15 feet high, only 5 feet from your living room or office window. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. I had a communication from Councillor Nick Palmer, who was one of the ward councillors, and I agreed that I'd read out his point during the commentary, so I'll do it now. So these are, of course, Councillor Palmer's words. I'm one of the two ward councillors and was invited by the residents numbers 121 and 125 to hear their views. As I haven't spoken with the applicant to hear his side of the issues, I'm reluctant to offer a general recommendation, but one point in the officer's report does strike me as mistaken. The officer says, page 12, conceding that the 45-degree rule is breached, says, however, in the case of number 121, the window serving the living room is considered to be a secondary window, as there's a primary window on the rear elevation. In my opinion, this is not correct. My understanding is that the officer didn't actually enter the property, probably for understandable COVID-related reasons. The living room is very long, 24 feet, and on the side of the window to the point where it is best thought of as L-shaped, with a side window starting 14 feet from the room along the length of the L. The patio doors at the rear illuminate the base of the L, but the settee and chairs on the length of the L, which I'd call the social area for relaxation in the living room, are dependent on the side window for illumination. The patio, which is 14 to 24 feet away, actually doesn't help significantly. In my opinion, the effect of development would be to force the residents number 121 to use artificial light whenever they wish to use a social area, and this would impact on their quality of life. And he finishes by saying, I won't offer an opinion on whether this means that application should be refused, but I would be grateful if you can inform the committee of my comments. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, could I ask Tracy if she did actually go inside?
Thank you. No, I didn't go inside the dwelling because of COVID reasons. However, I did visit 121. I walked down the side of the dwelling. I could see through the side window to the rear window. And also there is a door to the rear of that room which lets in sunlight and daylight from the front of the dwelling as well. However, because that is not classed as a window, I haven't acknowledged that in my report. I do acknowledge that that room is fairly long. They have their side window and they have the rear window. But no, I didn't go inside. Sorry, Councillor. Okay, thank you, Tracy. It's perfectly understandable. I'm very familiar with this area because I live just around the corner and walk the dog past it. Now, I'm actually surprised that they got permission to put that bungalow in there in the first place because it is an extremely cramped plot.
But I did notice, because I went and had a look at it, I didn't visit the place, although I was invited. It is almost overbearing to that window now. And the fact that it's going to be considerably higher, I agree with the objection that it's going to make that room extremely dark. I think the mistake possibly is to call it a secondary window. I think that if anything, they're equal. And I don't like to think that we would actually make somebody use electricity all day and every day. So I will be against this. I'll be voting against that for just that reason. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Cossa.
I just wonder if it would be helpful, Chairman, if we could hear from the planning officer on this statement made about a 15-foot wall appearing 5 feet away from the window. I mean, it really doesn't sound like a very attractive prospect, and one I suspect we would all be concerned about. And there is a statement associated with that in measuring that we have applied the wrong test, and I think the response of our planning officer that may just be helpful to all of us in a sense in helping to judge our view on this application.
Tracy, perhaps we should go through this in more detail.
Yeah, that's fine. So the test that was used was a 45-degree angle, which has failed currently. I believe that the 25-degree angle would also be failed currently. Approximately, well, sorry, I haven't measured it. Approximately 1 meter from the boundary is a 1.5 meter boundary fence at present, of which a short distance away from that is the current side elevation of the existing bungalow. So whilst it is acknowledged that there will be an effect upon that window, it's also acknowledged that the window at present does not have a lot of light available to it, you know, from that which the current situation allows. Therefore, I think it has to be balanced of whether the harm would be so significant to warrant the refusal of the application, given that there is alternative windows in which to provide light. That's been the basis of my conclusion. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Seaborn.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I'm a great believer in using the supplementary planning document on residential extensions, and it seems to me that if we're not clear that that side window is primary or not, and if the 25-degree test hasn't been carried out, then it seems to be rather difficult to go forward with this, which is a pity, because actually beyond that I had two questions which I will ask, but I thought it was a clear report, and I was erring towards supporting. But firstly, there's nothing. I didn't find any mention in the report about checking on the adequacy of the off-street parking provision. So Binscombe is not a road well suited for off-road parking, so we need to be sure that the parking provision on the forecourt will be adequate. And the diagrams in the plans show an example of 3 cars parked on the forecourt. So if that has been checked and verified, that's fine. But I would just like to ask whether that is actually the case, because it's normally something that would appear in the report. And secondly, the question of refuse bin storage is not addressed in the report. And again, if you go to the plans, there's an indicative location for the bin storage in the side passageway on the north side of the building. And the question is pretty much the same as the first question. Since it's not discussed in the report, could you confirm that you've checked that the adequacy of space for those bins is sufficient to allow passage through that side entrance? Because there's a bike store around the back, and obviously a bicycle would have to get past the bins to get to the garden to use the bike store. So I'm struggling on the grounds of light and the side window. but I think it would help us all if we could just have clarification that the parking is adequate and that the bin storage provision is adequate. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Tracy, can you comment on those points, those 2 points?
Yes, of course. I don't think that I have addressed a section upon parking in the report. However, the parking arrangements do demonstrate that the provision of 2.5 cars has been met, as set out by both Waverley and Surrey Highways. And in regards to refuse, again, this has not been addressed. There is ample room for bins to be stored in the back garden or away from the front of the dwelling, which is what we would be seeking. However, conditions could be attached to secure both of these details, or conditions submitted in accordance with the plans set out or plans to be submitted to the council. Thank you.
Councillor Follows.
Thank you very much, Chair. And I think in the first instance, it's probably just worth saying that I don't think the existence of bungalows needs any help from us. I mean, trying to find one for parents recently in the local area, they are an endangered species without any help from borough councils. I do, however, know this site fairly well as well. I certainly understand where Councillor Wilson and Councillor Palmer are coming from, and I certainly would, I think, if I were in the house that's impacted by this, have quite a lot of concern, and so I can understand why they're objecting. And certainly in terms of judging the impact on residential amenity, I do think there is some harm from this application as it's currently drafted. So at the moment, I'm minded to vote to refuse this application based on that restriction of residential amenity for neighbours. Certainly when we looked at this at Godalming Town Council, the no objection from GCEC was predominantly because we were still waiting for some of the technical matters regarding the space and distance from this wall to be clarified, and so it's good to see that be done in here. But I still don't think it would be, I do think it impacts the residents nearby, and yes, they get light from other windows, but I mean, realistically, it's one of those things for me that's just a sort of matter of fairness, and the fact that they can use a different window to get their light from doesn't stop them having their light sources being adversely impacted by permissions such as this. The only very final thing I would just request is that there are a number of bits of this actual document in terms of I mean, most of the images are very clear and you can zoom in. There are a number of on my electronic copy, it says page 4 of 19, the proposed ground floor and first floor plans. There's little subsidiary notes to it that even zooming in quite well with good eyes, that's blurry, and it would help if we could actually see some of these notes, because sometimes they're quite material, and I just want to flag that if we're going to include these diagrams that have clearly got notes, they definitely need to be legible for all members, or clarified in the text somewhere, but otherwise thank you, Chair.
I think Councillor Follows, of course, all these diagrams are on the website. I mean, so anyone who wants to can go to see them, but I take your point. But
if I may, Chair, I'm actually reviewing the document on the published electronic copy on the website. If the fidelity of the plan is good enough on the plans, it should be that fidelity in the papers, would be my argument. But I know that's separate, so thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you. Councillor Townsend.
Thank you, Chairman. I think I'm not quite convinced yet by the argument that although there's little light going to this back window, that we should then remove further light from the dwelling to the side. But the other thing that I just wanted to point out, and there may be a very good reason, or perhaps I've missed it, is the electrical charging point. I thought we normally had those on a new property, but I can't seem to find a condition for it, and I just wondered if it had been omitted or whether I just missed it. Thank you.
Tracy, can you comment on the point about the charging point?
Yeah, that seems to be a condition that has been omitted. And again, in the event of approval, a condition could be added for the car charging. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I guess we should include that when we come to the vote to make clear that that condition has been added. So that'll be condition 10, I suppose. Or did we already add one?
I believe that it would possibly be bin storage as condition 12, car charging as condition 13.
Okay. Oh yes, that's right. Right. Thank you. Councillor Dinas.
Thank you, Chair. My point's already just been raised about electric charging, so my other points have all been covered, so I won't repeat.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Egan.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just wanting to make sure I do fully understand Tracy's comment about the 25-degree test. I think you said that the 25-degree test is failed by the existing relationship between the window and number 121. Is that right? Sorry, the window 121 and the existing bungalow, and therefore you haven't considered it material that the new arrangement would also fail that test.
Tracy?
I believe that to be the case, yes.
So is there not an argument that you can say that because the wall is bigger, the detrimental effect is going to be greater, even though the failure of the test is the same in both cases?
I think that was my sort of point I was trying to make. Perhaps I didn't put that across very well.
Councillor Els.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, when I first saw this application, I was quite pleased to see a slightly more modern piece of architecture than what we're used to seeing. Especially number 121 Binscombe Lane. I think I probably did the planning application for that 50 plus years ago, and that was considered quite state of the art at the time with its axometric roof, etc. I don't remember including the window down the side, but I'm sure it was part of the scheme. My first thoughts on looking at this were why is the new house positioned on the site the way it is? You've got 1.6 metres to the boundary with 125, and the front of the house on the boundary to 121 is virtually on the boundary. There's just room for the foundations. And I was wondering why the whole house wasn't shunted over towards 125 to alleviate the problem that 121 will be experiencing. And then, of course, I noticed that the new dwelling has a side window, and they've pulled it away from the boundary with 125, presumably to allow more light into that, thereby causing problems to 121 to alleviate that problem in their own 123. It just seems that this house is too big for the site. It's too wide. It could be redesigned. I'm sure it could, and still have the parking at the front and virtually the same accommodation, and just take away the problem from 121, and everybody can be happy and live together. So I'm verging on voting for refusal, but I'll wait to see if anybody else has anything to say. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. I don't see any other speakers with their hands up, so it sounds to me like we can move to the vote. So the recommendation is that permission be granted subject to conditions 1 to 13 and 1 informative. So Fiona, can we have the voting system, please?
I just share those results, Chairman. That's 1 vote in favour, 13 against and 1 abstention. So that recommendation has failed.
Okay, so we move to the alternative procedure. So can I have an alternative recommendation and a seconder, please? Who wishes to propose that that we refuse this?
I propose.
Sorry.
I propose we refuse it on neighbourhood amenity, lack of light. Thank you.
And is there a seconder for that?
Happy to second, Chair.
Thank you. Now, the procedure we have on the paper here is that the proposer and seconder will go off to with the officers to a breakout room just to make sure we've got this sensible. Now, I know this procedure is under some question, but I think we've used it quite successfully in this committee. So just so everyone is clear, to make sure that we have a watertight case for the proposing this, for refusing this, we'll go off for a couple of minutes. I hope not too long. Put together something that is makes sense in planning law, and then we'll come back to committee, and there can then be a discussion on that before we finally vote. So Fiona, can you move the appropriate people as per the script to the breakout room, please? As councillors Wilson follows, who should join the rest of us.
Yeah.
Are we all back? Anyone who's not here, please say.
I can see.
I think that's everybody.
Sorry, I couldn't see Tracy's back, but if you think she is. Okay, right. So the result of the discussion was that the proposed reason for refusal is that that the application be refused by reason of its bulk, mass, and siting, which would result in an unacceptable loss of light to the to number 121, contrary to policies TD1, D1, and D4. So that's proposed by Councillor Wilson, seconded by Councillor Follows. So is there any comment? So this is open to debate now. Is there any councillor who wishes to speak about the revised amendment? So the revised recommendation, excuse me. Okay. Doesn't sound anyone wants to. So we'll move to the vote on that reason, on that recommendation. Councillor Cossa.
Chairman, I actually don't want to talk about that. I just wanted to raise a point of order, if I can, please. I mean, we had a report to the council last night, which included within it a proposal, which I believe was agreed by the council, that we should not use breakout rooms until there have been further study of them by standards and by democratic services, so that a proper protocol should be worked out. And I'd just like some advice on that, please, because it does seem to me, I mean, there are different views about them. You're absolutely right. I don't like them. I don't think they're transparent enough. And I thought we were in a council now that prized itself on its transparency. And I'm surprised that has been used, given what was in the council documents last night.
Well, I'm certainly willing to comment on that. Can we close off this recommendation, this item, and then we can come back to that? That certainly wasn't my view of what was said last night. A lot of comments from people involved with the Western planning, but I don't believe there was any conclusion about that. So can we please move to the vote? But I will allow comment on that following the vote. So the recommendation has been. I just read it out. So can we move to a vote on that, please?
Just wanted to check, Chairman. Councillor Wilson and Councillor Follows have their hands up. Are you wanting to speak in relation to the other matter?
To the other matter in my.
Okay.
Yep.
I'll launch the poll.
Leave those up then. So 4 is to refuse, of course.
I'm expecting one more vote, but it is, oh, there we go. So if I could share the results, that's 13 votes in favour of refusing the recommendation for that reason, none against, and 2 abstentions.
Thank you. Okay, so we'll take Councillor Cossa's point of order now. So I've got two hands up. Councillor Wilson.
I would just like to, in the interest of transparency, tell Councillor Cossa that in the breakout room, the suggestion I made to the floor about the loss of light was merely put into planning speak, and we just voted that it is in there because of loss of light. Thank you.
Councillor Follows.
Thank you, Chair. Just to quickly say that the part that was approved at full council yesterday extended the current planning committee structure as it is on Zoom. It didn't actually render an opinion in terms of decision in regards to the use of breakout rooms. As a result, it's still in the uncodified remit of the chair to do it in the way that they see fit. Now, in the standards committee that discussed that particular matter in detail, I certainly propose that we should codify it, and it would be the preferable state that we try not to use it, but codify it for the hopefully rare eventuality that we need to use it. But at this point, only the chair of Western planning expressed a particular view that he was not going to use them under any circumstances. At present, the chair of Eastern is entirely within his rights to do that if he so wishes. But the council decision yesterday and its equivalent at standards did not render a decision on the subject whatsoever. So in terms of a point of order that that argues there was a decision in any particular direction, will in itself, I think, be out of order.
Can I, sorry, Chairman, can I actually quote from the report that went to council last night, page 423? The Standards Committee agreed that the head of planning and democratic services managers should develop a protocol for the use of breakout rooms in planning meetings, and until such time as this protocol was developed, not to use them. And that was before the council. I saw no objection to that last night. I hear what's being said, but I do think that we should be heeding what had been agreed in the Standards Committee and was reported to council last night.
I understand. We'll proceed with the next item. 8.3, WA 2020-1218, 23 Bourne Road, Farncombe. Application under section 72 to remove condition 27 of WA 2018-0692 restricts hours of use of D1 religious meeting hall. So Lara, can you make the briefing, please?
Thank you, Councillor. I'm just going to share my screen. Okay. The site address is 23 Bourne Road, Farncombe, and the application seeks to remove condition 27 of WA 2018-0692 in its entirety. The existing condition restricts the hours of use of the religious meeting hall. The current hours of use are as follows: Monday to Friday, 6 till 8 p.m, nothing on Saturday, and on Sundays and bank holiday, 6 a.m. to 5 p.m. I'd just like to have one verbal update. That the reason for call-in by Councillor Rivers is not what it says on the original report. This is when the application was going to be approved. This is to ensure a fair and transparent decision-making due to the application being recommended for refusal. Then this slide shows the location of the proposed site, positioned to the northwest of Molyneux Road and to the southwest of Bourne Road. I must add, all these plans are taken from the original application, as due to the nature of the application, just removing the condition. Here you can see the aerial photograph where you can see the area is predominantly residential in character, with the White Hart pub situated to the south of the application site here, and the proposed site here. Here's the site plan, which again is on the original permission. Here are some site photographs taken this afternoon. The top photograph is from across the road. On the left-hand side here, you can see down towards the White Hart, and on the right-hand side, you can see in the opposite direction along Bourne Road. Here shows the approved elevations, showing the religious facility here. As the applicant seeks to remove condition, this would allow access into the religious site 24/7. As such, officers are recommending refusal of the application, as it gives rise to adverse conditions in terms of noise and disturbance, which would harm the residential amenity. The key matters for consideration, as outlined in the report, are impacts on residential amenity only. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. We have one speaker, Mr. Ed Dalton. Sorry, excuse me, there are two speakers. The first is Mr. Ed Dalton.
Hi there, good evening. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, so go ahead, you have 4 minutes.
Okay, fine. I've collated the key points from all the objecting residents, and the main common concern is the risk to further loss of local amenity should condition 27 be removed.
Are you still in your break?
No.
Breakout.
So when the original application was brought to committee, the council deferred the decision, with many councillors raising issues about the 6 a.m. service start time every Sunday and every evening throughout the week, together with the lack of parking and the overall noise and disturbance the use of the meeting hall will clearly create. Over 50 households in the immediate vicinity signed a petition against this development, but our concerns were ultimately ignored. At the second meeting, when approval was granted, we were given assurances that the restricted hours of use would give some protection to residents, but now this application seeks to remove those assurances altogether. Without control measures in place to govern when the meeting hall can be used, it could bring 24/7 disturbance for long-suffering residents who already contend with noise and antisocial behaviour from the pub next door. To remove the restrictions before the development has even been built makes no sense whatsoever and removes the opportunity for the users to show that they can be good neighbours and abide by the existing hours of occupancy in a quiet and unobstructive way. It would set a dangerous precedent for other organisations and businesses to allow unrestricted use and bypass rules designed to protect residents. What are the implications should the site be sold on in the future without any restrictions attached? The application cites a previous scheme which was approved in the same way, but this was not in a wholly residential area completely surrounded by families, but in an industrial estate, and it therefore seems irrelevant. People with young families live within a few metres of the hall and could be disturbed at any hour and day of the week if the condition was removed. Disturbance and noise could be in many things, from people and cars arriving and leaving, doors slamming, bright headlights at night and in winter, to services being audible from the street. Noise travels, especially early in the morning and late in the day. I personally live opposite the entrance to the meeting hall, and my 11-year-old daughter's bedroom directly overlooks it. We, along with many others in the area, are already dreading the impact the meeting hall is going to have. The concerns have nothing to do with the intended use of the hall. Indeed, many people objecting are regular churchgoers themselves. It's the massive impact on our life, which is inevitable if condition 27 is removed. Parking will clearly be an issue, with only a handful of parking spaces available in the development to be shared between a shop, 3 houses, an office and the 45-seat meeting hall. Inevitably, large numbers of vehicles will be forced to park on Bourne Road and the surrounding roads when the hall is being used. There is very little roadside parking spare, and when the usual large numbers of commuters return post-COVID, this will be even worse. Dangerous bottlenecks will occur. The road is a major thoroughfare for school children with 3 schools in the immediate area. It's right next to a busy crossroad junction on the main route out of Farncombe, and cars accelerate hard because the speed bumps end on Green Lane. Speeding is rife. One resident has already been knocked off his bike this year on Bourne Road, and numerous other near misses witnessed by others. There's concern for wheelchair users and the elderly residents. Road safety is already an issue with the current volume of traffic, and this will only get worse with more cars coming to the immediate area if the restrictions are removed. This is not protecting local amenity. The application requests the removal of condition 27 to allow for further pastoral care, outreach work and other religious celebrations. Why not use their existing large meeting hall only 500 metres away on New Pond Road for this requirement? It has over 90 parking spaces and plenty of room away from residential areas. We hope that the council will look to protect the many residents so worried by this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dalton. Speaking also is Matt Smith, who is the agent.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Brilliant. Good evening, members. My name is Smith from D&M Planning Limited, speaking tonight on behalf of the applicant. As I hope you would have seen in advance of tonight's meeting, I circulated our comments on the applications, just in case of any technical issues tonight. As you would have heard, the application before you is made under Section 73 of the Town and Country Planning Act to remove Condition 27 of the development approved under reference WA 2018-0692. This condition, as you've heard, limits the hours of the approved D1 meeting hall so that it can only operate Monday to Friday, 6 PM to 8 PM, and on Sunday and bank holidays between 6 AM and 5 PM. It cannot lawfully operate outside of these hours. The Plymouth Brethren, who will be the users of this meeting hall, meet throughout the world at the same time. They meet for fellowship and Holy Communion in the morning on Sunday and weekday evenings for Bible readings and prayer meetings. The removal of Condition 27 would not change this doctrine of the Church. The community that this building serves will not be meeting or congregating outside of these hours. The Brethren are seeking the removal of this condition, as under its current wording, it would be unlawful for an individual or family to use the meeting hall for private prayer or pastoral care. The Brethren are a deeply religious group, and their individual members wish to have access to the meeting hall to satisfy their own spiritual needs in time of celebration or crisis. These timings and the spiritual needs simply cannot be controlled by a condition. The restrictive condition as it stands prejudices the ability of this community to follow their religious rites. I would stress that the hours of congregation and group fellowship will not change as a result of this application. We feel it is also important that members consider the additional planning arguments for the removal of this condition. These were set out in the planning statement submitted alongside the application. Paragraph 55 of the MPPF states that planning conditions should be kept to a minimum and only imposed where they are necessary, relevant to planning and to the development to be permitted, enforceable, precise, and reasonable in all other respects. For a condition to be considered valid, it must meet all 6 of these tests. As set out in the planning statement, we contend that condition 27 does not accord with 2 of these, nor does its inclusion keep conditions to a minimum. There are a total of 31 conditions to the original permission. 11 of these relate directly to the impact of the place of worship on the amenity of neighbours, 6 of which are specifically noise related. This is notwithstanding the condition we are seeking to remove, nor condition 28, which limits the planning use of this building. Restricting the hours of operation is therefore evidently not necessary, as the other 11 conditions should be sufficient to protect the amenity of neighbours from noise. The quiet movement of individuals are not going to be sufficient to give any disturbance in this otherwise busy residential area. It's worth bearing in mind the site is positioned on a main road in Farncombe that dissects the train line, is in close proximity to the train station, a public house, a social club, and the plumbing merchants. The removal of this condition to enable private worship is not going to result in disturbance. Accordingly, we assert that it is not reasonable nor necessary, and thus fails the 6 tests of a valid condition as set out in the MPPF and the MPPG. Members will also note that in consideration of appeals, the test of reasonableness is one constantly employed by inspectors. Indeed, in the consideration of an application for a meeting hall for the Plymouth Brethren, also within the residential areas of Godalming and Farncombe, the inspector did not include an hour of limiting operations. This was despite submissions to the contrary. We therefore respectfully request that members approve this application so that members of the congregation are able to undertake their own private prayer in future. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next I've got Councillor Penny Rivers, but I understand you're speaking on behalf of the parish council, not as the ward councillor. Therefore, you will not get a second chance at the end of the debate. So, Councillor Rivers, do you wish to speak? Sorry, please make your piece.
Thank you. I'll try to, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for this opportunity to speak in support of the applicant tonight. I've read the local letters of objection from the local residents, and I've read the applicant's planning statements, all of which are on the website. This application, as you know, is simply to remove condition 27 from the original application. Condition 27 is for the hours of worship set for the brethren all over the world. So as Matt Smith has just said, they are 6 a.m. on Sundays till 5 p.m. and weekday nights 6 p.m. till 8 p.m. That is their hours of worship. That condition thereby does not permit the brethren to use that hall outside of those hours. And if rigorously applied, they could not clean their building, they could not maintain their building, they could not repair their premises except at those times. It is like restricting all local all churches to be open only for the times of worship. The removal of the condition would allow the brethren to have private prayer, private Bible study, and pastoral care. None of those are noisy. The planning statement sets out reasons why this condition is inappropriate and why it is reasonable for the condition to be removed, and I support them all. After all, this hall is for a congregation of 45 people. They are local. Many of them will walk to the hall. It will never be used for secular or other activities. There will never be a disco in that hall. And if noise were to be found to be a problem, members will be aware that Waverley has an effective process for recording complaints about excessive noise from any source and can take action if it is considered to be a statutory nuisance. Brethren do not use amplified music. Many of the objectors state that they see zero benefit to the community in this application. They may not be aware that the brethren do indeed make a positive contribution to this community, and it was the local brethren who rescued the flood victims in Mead Row at Christmas 2013. Godalming councillors will know too that the brethren worshipped in the hall opposite the fish and chip shop in Lower Manor Road that is now a nursery school. They worshipped there from the 1800s. There was no parking for that hall, and that hall is very close to the neighbouring houses on both sides. There were never any complaints about noise. And of course, councillors will know that freedom of worship is a basic human right. In summary, I can see no reasonable grounds for the retention of this condition, and I urge members to grant permission for this application. Thank you.
Thank you. So that was the last of the external speakers. So, Councillor Cossa.
Thank you very much, Chairman. As Councillor Penny Rivers will know, it's not often I find myself so very, very, very strongly in the same camp. We don't always agree on everything, but on this one, I do. I'm not a churchgoer. I have no particular axe to grind, but I think it's so desperately important that we are reasonable in seeking to allow people to express their religious beliefs and preferences and so on. For what it's worth, I lived in Lower Manor Road for some years, and it took me some time to actually work out what that little hall was. I thought it was some sort of secret society, to be honest with you. So I take the point of the person who is a local resident and says, well, look, we don't quite know yet what it's going to be. But if it's anything like it was when it was in Lower Manor Road, I think you will hardly know that they were there. And I just can't see how there is a sensible objection given the reality of this particular grouping, that the numbers involved and what they want to use the hall for. What I would like to ask, however, if I can, Chairman, is we were told that there are already, and I'm sorry I haven't had a chance to research them, but I hope the planning officer can help us on this. There are already, apart from the statutory issues around noise and so on that Councillor Rivers referred to, there are already a considerable number of conditions attaching to the original application here, which would seek to address the concerns around noise and nuisance and so on. And I have to take the point as well that there are a considerable number of properties in this immediate vicinity. I know the road quite well. I use it very regularly, as I'm sure many people who live in this neck of the woods do. And, the plumber's merchant on the corner is a huge problem in terms of parking and so on. But I can't see that this is going to be so. And unless somebody can persuade me otherwise, I'm afraid I will be voting against the officer's recommendation in this case.
Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm in a strange position because I totally agree with Councillor Cossa. It's a bit of a shock, actually. No, we have agreed before. I have never met such a self-effacing, quiet, gentle bunch than the people who are making this application. As everybody has said so far, you don't see them. You see ladies with the scarf on. They are helpful to their neighbours. They do not make noise. They're not into the modern age. They are a very Christian group. And I think that we should allow them to use their place of worship for the things that we allow all other churches to use their place of worship. Pastoral care is very necessary, particularly at this time. Parking shouldn't be a difficulty because there is plenty of room, and if they park there, maybe some of the commuters won't. I disagree with the officers on this one, and I will vote in that way. And I would ask you all to join me. The other thing that I must say is that if this went to appeal, I have no doubt that we would lose it, costing both them and us money that neither of us can ill afford. So please vote in favour of religion and gentle people. Thank you.
Councillor Seaborn.
Thank you, Chairman. My take on this is just a variation on the theme. I do find the existing conditions overly restrictive for the reasons that previous speakers have set out. Use of religious facilities for private prayer, contemplation, meetings, small meetings with officers of the religious group to discuss things seem entirely reasonable things to do. But I wonder whether the total removal of all condition on timing is necessary. It seems to me that I have sympathy for the residents and broadly in agreement with the officer's recommendation on total removal not being ideal. But and we're not here today to discuss a compromise position. But I see both sides of this. I think the total removal is excessive and the current conditions are excessive. So I'll listen to what colleagues have to say on this. I'm sort of minded at the moment to support officers, but I'm very uncomfortable with the existing conditions as they stand as well. Thank you.
Councillor Else.
Thank you, Chairman. Like Councillor Costa, I used to live around the corner from Lower Manor Road, so and like him, actually, I didn't really appreciate that the small hall there was still in use by a religious group, so they certainly didn't cause me any trouble. I also, before I lived round that corner, I lived round the corner from this site, and I know how noisy the White Hart could be, so I've experienced both sides of it. It seems a bit churlish to me not to allow prayer as described, but to, so near to a pub with long hours, music license, parties, etc. I think that the worrying thing is the certain religious celebrations, private prayer, pastoral outreach work, private Bible studies are all things that I would have expected to have been allowed. And I don't think I ever really appreciated that they were being excluded when we put the previous condition on. But I don't know, the religious celebrations is probably the things that the neighbours seem to be most worried about. I can't see that anybody living down that road would have any concern about private prayer or private Bible studies of 2 or 3 people. And like Councillor Seaborn, I would hope that should this committee agree with the recommendation, that some sort of compromise can be agreed after that between officers and the residents and the applicants to have more use during the day for smaller groups. And then hopefully they can all live in peace and harmony with each other. Thank you.
Councillor Follows.
Thank you, Chair. This is one of those ones that I don't actually really think is a planning matter almost. This is actually about equality, and I'm not religious at all, but the idea of restricting one particular denomination in terms of how they worship and how they act and not others feels randomly punitive and probably discriminatory, and I just don't think that that's the sort of council we should be, let alone a sort of planning committee we should be. I'm sure there's some level of reasonable concern of the community in this case, because I think it's a lot of it is not knowing what to expect and being concerned about that prospect, and I completely understand where that be coming from. But in practice, I don't think we can just pick and choose which denominations we restrict in terms of what worship we consider to be acceptable. As long as they're not actually prescribed by law, then from my perspective, as a complete agnostic, I don't understand how we can give specific conditions to a denomination over another. So I will be voting exactly as Councillor Penny Rivers has illustrated with her comments, which I agree with 100%. Thank you.
I think on Richard's point, I'm not sure you can be a complete agnostic. I think that's a contradiction in terms, but okay.
I agree with you completely, Richard. Sorry. Okay. We might drift there.
Councillor Gray.
Thank you, Chairman. I am treasurer of a church, and
we do use the church at various times, but not intensely. Church use would not be 24 by 7. And I therefore got some sympathy with the leaders of the church in terms of the restriction. However, I've also got sympathy with the neighbours. They did say that they were concerned that if this building should be disposed of, would the conditions go with it? And that's something I'd like the officers to say is, could we restrict this to the use by the church? And also, what is it that they're going to want to do? They're going to want to come to do private prayer at 5 o'clock in the morning. Is that what they're suggesting and is reasonable? And also, is it possible that they could have this dispensation for a period of 12 months? We've done that with other areas where we've done things. I don't know whether I agree with Councillor Follows. I think it is a planning matter. It's a planning matter because we made it a planning matter when we put the restriction on in the first place. So if we could come back from the officers to say, is there any way that we can limit the sort of the 24 by 7 on any subsequent owners? And is there potentially an option of having this relaxation of this condition for a period of 12 months and then to review that with the neighbours, which to me seems something which we could bring the two sides of the communities together, which is important. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Can the officers, perhaps Lewis, comment on whether that proposal made by Councillor Gray is any way forward on this particular application?
Thank you, Chairman. I've actually just been discussing this with Beth. I think our view is that there's sufficient control in the existing conditions, aside from this condition we're talking about, relating to noise and disturbance. If you look at conditions 5, 3, 5, 6, and 7, and even 8, all relate to noise disturbance. And I think that should reassure members and give us sufficient control in the future if a new owner comes in and we have concern, if residents have concerns, there is that control that we can enforce those conditions for our enforcement powers. So I think that's the view I would take. I think the issue here is we have to look at whether there is a real planning purpose for this condition, and if we don't, then I think we should grant permission.
Can I ask a question myself? That is, for buildings of this sort, means semi-public buildings, in a sense, buildings which are used by a large group. Would we normally have conditions of this sort on that? I mean, trying to think of a parish council, sorry, a parish hall, or I'm trying to go away from sort of religious buildings, but parish hall or a meeting hall of another group.
I think it completely depends on the context. It depends on the nature of the building itself, but also where the building is located and what's located nearby it. So I don't think there are any hard and fast rules. And unfortunately, there is just a lot of planning judgment involved here. And these will always be very fact specific, and they will be issues of fact and degree. So I'm sure there are examples where similar conditions have been imposed on these sorts of public buildings. I think my personal view is that the condition is quite a firm one, and I think members need to think very carefully about what harm is trying to be overcome by the imposition of the condition, and whether that harm exists to the extent where it is necessary.
Yes, I mean, as was the first speaker said, the resident said he was concerned, and I presume others are concerned as well, that it's a new building, they don't know what it'll be like. They are concerned about what will happen. But your opinion is that the committee has to decide whether the current conditions are too onerous, basically. They go beyond the point of providing protection to local residents.
I mean, broadly speaking, yes. I mean, the condition has been imposed. The committee now need to consider whether the permission without this condition is satisfactory in planning terms. So the committee really have to revisit the issue and decide whether there is planning harm that needs to be overcome by this condition, or whether the permission is acceptable without it, looking at the planning context as a whole. I mean, it's really a matter of planning judgment that the committee needs to take a view on, and where one committee could come to one conclusion, another could come to another conclusion, so long as that decision is properly justified and thought through, of course.
So perhaps we should need to go back to Laura. So perhaps can we restate what the justification for maintaining the condition is? I'm sure it's in the report.
Yeah, Councillor. So if you get the report in front of you, page 8, end of page 7, start of page 8. So as we've discussed, there are a number of other planning conditions that limit the noise and disturb the noise within the religious building. However, the specific condition that they're seeking to remove would control. So these conditions would not limit the noise and disturbance caused by people congregating outside the development. So, for example, if there was no condition on the timings of use, it would be allowed to use all throughout the night, all throughout the day, at whatever point, obviously up to 45 people. So, which would have the potential for noise and disturbance beyond what can be considered reasonable for a mixed-use development such as this. So it's sort of outlined that there are obviously a number of conditions that control noise, but this one specifically allows controls within and outside of the development site.
Okay, so the vote then is if we vote for refusal, then we are maintaining. Sorry, if we allow the application, then we lose that condition in its entirety. There's no it's that or leave the condition in.
Yes. So the application has been made to remove the condition in its entirety. It hasn't been made to vary the condition. Obviously, if it was been made to vary, to change the wording to include more use during the day or use on Saturdays, but as it stands, the building would be, if it was removed, the building could be used at any time of the day up to the limits, but would also be controlled by the conditions that are outlined on the end of page 7, the beginning of page 8.
Thank you. Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Chair. Just to put another sort of cog into the mix, I am rather concerned here that if the condition is removed, and I am a religious person and I believe in religious freedom, but I think the other issue is this facility ever going to be let during the time it still is under the control of the Plymouth Brethren? I remember as a child attending a meeting, not as a Plymouth Brethren, but for another society in the meeting house. So I think we need to think about that as another thought. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Townsend.
Thank you, Chairman. I mean, this is a really difficult one, because I'm sure the people that are attending this religious meeting place are extremely lovely, and obviously I'm sure that nobody wants to curtail their time to worship at all. And I haven't made my mind up yet. I'm still concerned, because you know, planning is not about giving planning permission to lovely people. It's about a set of principles, and we use our judgment on them. So I'm going to have to take it away and just think of it as a building that has got D1 usage, and at the moment has got sort of opening hours. And that's the question that I actually want to ask Lara, is that if this was a building for another D1 usage, say a nursery school or that, would we usually condition the time on it that it would be used? Is that a normal thing that we condition the time on? Thank you.
Laura, do you want to try and answer that one?
I believe it would be, but would I be able to get confirmation from either Beth or Marie on that question, please?
Chairman, I'm happy to take that. Again, it's entirely dependent on the context of the application site, the proximity to sensitive neighbouring properties, noise-sensitive neighbouring properties. There is, again, as is always the case in planning, unfortunately, no hard and fast rule, but we would look carefully at the impact on neighbouring residential properties and look at the likelihood of, well, not even the likelihood, we'd be looking at what would happen with that without that control, what could happen without that control. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Okay, two people who have spoken before, so Councillor follows. Can you make your remarks brief? I think we can try and move to the vote fairly quickly.
Yeah, I think it's really just to extend the point that Councillor Townsend was making a little. We've got St John's in Farncombe not too far away from there, and the idea that you would restrict by condition that building, which of course could be used by a larger congregation than we're talking here for any use at any time, as far as I understand it. So, I mean, at what point here are we picking different denominations to apply certain conditions on, and at what basis are we doing that? I mean, are we doing that out of a planning reason, or are we doing that out of misunderstanding or some other problematic reason for applying the condition? The church in Farncombe is near residential. It's near a care home. It can operate whenever it likes and do whatever it wants without restriction. I really am troubled by applying a specific restriction to one particular group with not a huge amount of justification, other than at the moment some unfounded concern. The other conditions, so if they go there and are congregating noisily and in breach of those conditions are already there, planning enforcement can act, and to be quite honest, the police will act if that's the case, as they would for any religious organisation or civic organisation that would be breaching those conditions. I think personally this extra condition is excessive and discriminatory. It's unnecessary too. I mean, we can restrict what we're trying to deal with here. So I do have problems with this condition, and will happily see it gone.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Wilson, again, could you be brief, please?
I shall be extremely brief. My understanding, because I did a bit of reading on this particular group, is that they would not be letting their hall. They don't do it. They don't interact with the public. They're not going to run a disco. They're not going to do anything like that. And the other observation is we are trying to manage the street. We've managed within the area with the standing conditions at the moment. We're now trying to manage the street, people walking along the pavement, people walking down past the pub and what have you. We can't do that. It's without the site. We should be looking at the plot. We don't manage people coming out of cinemas. We don't manage people coming out of other churches. So I don't think we should be trying to manage people coming out of this hall. Thank you.
Marie, do you wish to make a comment?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just to clarify that condition 28 on the original consent restricts the Class D1 use to a place of worship. So it would require planning permission to be used as any other use within that class.
Thank you. Okay, I don't have any more hands up, so I think we can move to the vote. So the recommendation is permission be refused. That is to say that the existing condition is maintained. So can we have the voting machine, please?
One more member of the committee to vote.
Never came up on my screen.
Right. Would you like to tell me which way you would like to vote then, Councillor
Vote
Goodrich?
with the officer's recommendation.
So you're voting for. So if I share the results there, then so that's 4 votes for the recommendation to refuse, 10 votes against, and 1 abstention. So that recommendation has failed.
Okay, so can I have an alternative recommendation and seconder, please? I think the conditions will be fairly clear, so I don't think we'll have to worry too much about that.
May I ask a question, Chair? In terms of recommendations in this, I mean, I would like to obviously propose an alternative recommendation for certain. I'm sure there'll be a seconder in the group here. Is it literally that we wish to strike that particular condition? What actually is the action here to be taken, if I'm understood there?
Well, the application was indeed to remove condition 27, so presumably that condition will be removed.
Will be removed, right?
Well,
okay.
or unless you have an alternative recommendation, but since that's the so can someone propose?
Yeah, so I propose that we remove that condition.
Happy
as
to
the
second.
recommendation. Okay,
that's clear. I don't think we need to go to any other. So that's the revised recommendation. Are there any comments to that recommendation before we go to a vote?
Yes, Chair. There was just one thing I just wanted to quickly say on that recommendation, if I may.
Go ahead. Yeah.
And that is just to clarify and give reassurance to the residents that I am certain, as has been mentioned here, that the other conditions regarding noise and excessive congregation of people in that road, I believe they are completely sufficient to control this. And should there be issues, I would urge them to raise them with both planning enforcement and, if necessary, the police, and they will be dealt with appropriately. I'm opposing this, agreeing for the removal of this condition because I deem it discriminatory and unnecessary. And I believe it can be enforced through extant measures, and would urge you to do that if you're in a position to need it. And I'm sure your ward councillors will help you in that if that ever happens.
Are there any other comments to be made? No. Okay. So the recommendation. So who's that? So that's Beth. Go ahead.
Yes. Apologies. If I could just ask members to provide a reason for granting the permission, just as we would need a reason for overturning and refusing permission, we will need to provide a reason for granting the permission.
Okay.
If I may, Chair, is it sufficient to say that the condition is superfluous, or I'm sure the discussions I've made about discriminatory issues here are probably not planning matters, but I do think the condition is superfluous and is handled by other conditions.
Is that adequate, Beth? Beth, you're on mute. The question, do you believe that's what was proposed by Councillor Follows is an adequate reason?
Apologies,
hello, Beth.
Chairman. I think I would look to Lewis as to whether or not that is a robust enough reason. I mean, we do need to be very careful that it is a planning reason. No, superfluous. I mean, it would certainly indicate that the original condition hadn't met one of the tests. So it is a planning reason in that respect. But in terms of the reason for granting permission, whether or not it's legally correct, I would certainly need to seek Lewis's view on that, please.
Yeah, Lewis, can you comment, please?
Yes, thanks, Councillor. Sorry, I've just stopped my video. There you are. I think the important thing here is just for members to clarify why they're departing from the officer's recommendation to refuse. The officer had recommended refusal for reasons relating to noise and disturbance. It appears that members don't agree with the officer in that respect. So I think it's probably enough just if members agree to say that they think the planning permission will be in accordance with the development plan and acceptable in planning terms without the condition attached to it, as amended in effect, because they don't agree that harm will result and therefore render it contrary to our development plan.
So how would we word that for the recommendation?
Well, I think it would just be enough in that case. I'll try and shorten it. Apologies, Chairman. I think it's probably enough just to say that the planning permission as modified is acceptable in planning terms and in accordance with the council's development plan.
So you can say it again. Planning permission is acceptable. So permission as modified is acceptable and in accordance with the development plan.
Yes, and the reason being that there is no conflict with the development plan in terms of noise and disturbance.
Okay, Councillor Follows, that's your your motion. Do you wish that to amend it?
I'm happy with that because the other conditions deal with the issue.
Can I just ask one thing, Chairman? May I?
But yeah, hang on. Yes, we can debate that motion. We'll do it formally. So yeah. The motion has been amended. I presume do you wish to second it still because you were the seconder? Is that or do you wish to?
Yes, I'll still second it, but I would like to just ask something. Thank you.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. Could it be on the basis, and I'm looking at Lewis here, what we're deciding, could it be because the development usage is now perhaps substantially different at all from what was perceived the original usage might be, as in that the original usage for a place of worship, we wouldn't normally condition times probably. I wasn't aware that it was just had that D1 class, that it was just a place of worship. So would it be that we could now say that there had been a change in circumstances that we weren't aware of at the original time the condition was imposed?
Are you happy for me to come in, Chairman?
Yes, sorry, go ahead. Yeah, excuse me. Yeah.
Thanks, Councillor Townsend. I think ultimately the reason I gave earlier probably encapsulates that already. I think really so long as members can vocalise the reasons why they're departing from the officer's recommendation, I think that's sufficient. The process is obviously a little bit different where we're granting permission than to refusing, because we won't be having to deal with an appeal here. So I think what I said earlier probably encapsulates what you said. The conclusion being that you don't think that the permission as amended will have any adverse impacts in relation to noise and disturbance. So I don't think it's necessary to go into quite that much detail, given that you've made that clear during this meeting.
I think we can move to a vote fairly quickly, but I see Councillor Sadler's hand is up. Do you have a brief comment, Councillor Sadler?
I do. I don't understand why we need to give a reason. We just feel that it should be removed, and I think it's as simple as that. Less is more, I think, and we don't want to start saying about other issues that we haven't really discussed. Okay. The fact of the matter is we've had a vote and we don't agree. That's end of story.
Well, legal advice from Lewis is that we have to be a bit more definite. But I think I don't hear any objection to the wording that he, apart from the in-principle point of Councillor Sadler. So can we move to a vote, please, that we approve the application on the grounds that Lewis has just read out. So please vote. So 4 is to allow the application.
Thank you, members. So that's 12 votes in favour of removing the condition, 1 against and 2 abstentions. So that's the recommendation to remove the condition is passed.
Thank you very much. Okay, we'll move to the final item, A4, WA 2020-0600, land at Arlaw Banks, Hascombe Road, Godalming. Construction of a sand school and associated landscaping and change of use to equestrian land. Tracy, do you wish to make the presentation, please?
Thank you, Chairman. Let me just share my screen. The application seeks permission for the construction of a sand school and change of use and associated landscaping. Oops. Arlaw Banks is located to the west of Hascombe Road. It's situated within the Green Belt, AONB and AGLV. The application area outlined in red is currently a field used as a paddock. However, the land is classified as agricultural land. The proposed block plan shows the siting of the sand school in close proximity to a stable block which has recently been approved. The sand school would measure 60 metres by 25 metres. The proposed sand school would have a 1.2 metre post and rail fence around the perimeter. The ground material would consist of a beige carpet fibre and sand above this. A subbase and drainage has been indicated and would run off into a soakaway to the north. The site photos show that the property is fairly well screened by mature trees. The top photo depicts the level of the land as existing, and the relationships to the new stable block can be appreciated. Matters for consideration are the loss of agricultural land. However, there is no evidence that this land has been farmed for many years. The impact upon visual amenity and the impact upon the residential amenity. These all fall within the policies RD13, the non-commercial horsekeeping. The recommendation for set out in the officer's report is for approval. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, we have 2 speakers. The first one is Rachel Taylor, who's objecting.
Thank you. I represent the only neighbours who are overlooked by and back onto this site a few metres away from our boundary. The AONB advisor objected to the raising of the ground levels and the visual impact of the applicant's brightly multicoloured jumps. He recommended 4 planning conditions, all of which were ignored in your report. Farmland is being lost too often to horticulture. The proposal is contrary to policy RE3. The proposed 1.2 metre fence around the sand school sits on top of the increase in ground levels, thereby creating a 2.3 metre fence compared to current ground levels in the middle of the field in our direct line of sight. The offending jumps will be the most prominent feature as they are even taller. This cannot be considered to preserve the openness of the greenbelt on what was a previously open green agricultural field. It is inappropriate development contrary to policy RE2. The District Commissioner of the Pony Club has independently confirmed that this is larger than an ordinary sized private arena, and there is no justification for the proposal. DS Equine and Friends mention larger, more suitably sited arenas, but these are run by commercial enterprises. The guidance to policy RD13 requires careful siting to minimise effects on neighbours' amenities and the character of the countryside. However, the applicant has chosen to site the sand school adjoining and overlooking her neighbour. Any other position at Arlo Banks would be an improvement, and there is a far more appropriate location in the field to the south behind the applicant's house. Busbridge Parish Council objected, citing every section of RD13. The proposal is not small in scale. As recently as 2018, Waverley refused consent for the same square meterage as being too large for private use. The proposals jar with the green landscape and will immediately draw the eye. The scale, location, design, and materials are not appropriate to the character and appearance of the surrounding area. There are no horses at any of the 49 homes in the immediate vicinity. The character of the rural landscape was a quiet and peaceful open green field. Whilst riding is considered compatible, an excessively large raised sports stand school with a 2.3 metre high fencing and even higher multicoloured jumps is not compatible or justified. It will significantly detract from the character of the rural landscape. It is indisputable that the proposals are already destroying the use of our garden, amenity, privacy, outlook and enjoyment of our home, and will continue to do so if consent is granted. Prohibiting loudspeakers will not prevent noise pollution and disturbance. The noise includes very loud instructions shouted to both horses, riders, instructors and onlookers, made worse when it is elevated on horseback as it travels further distances. The applicant vaguely implies eco-benefits, but she has removed substantial 25-foot high boundary trees and vegetation, displacing numerous wildlife and removing our privacy. They see everything in our rear garden and into nearly every room in our home when on horseback, even before ground levels are raised, as evidenced in our photos and on the applicant's own Instagram. We do not have the money to screen ourselves. Plan errors mean even less of the sand school is screened by the stables than implied. It is not back-to-back residential development where the use is the same on both sides of the boundary. We are concerned that the applicant's agricultural consultants have not even inspected the site and based their report on mistake. If the committee consider the land classification relevant, please do not rely on a passing comment that the land is thought to be 3B without a proper assessment. We ask that the site remains for grazing only in this area of great landscape value. Thank you for considering our objections.
Thank you very much. David Spragg, you have your 4 minutes.
Good evening, committee. I specialise in equine design and planning. This application is simply for an outdoor arena of 60 metres by 25 metres to be located adjacent to recently replaced stables under application number WA 2019-1824. For outdoor arenas for private use only, allowing the applicant and her daughter to ride and train at home. The proposed arena is an acceptable size for use as training for show jumping and dressage disciplines, and to maximise safety for horse and rider. The size of the outdoor arena allows a horse to have the speed to jump the fence safely and then slow down and turn. Right. I've applied for many outdoor arenas within Waverley District and neighbouring districts such as Southdown National Park, East Hants and Guildford. All have been at least 60 metres by 20 metres in size, and I've never applied for a 40 by 20 metre arena, as this is considered an inappropriate size for an arena if used for jumping or other competitive disciplines. Currently, the land is used as a grass riding area, and if the area is used in periods of wet weather, it will lead to poaching of the land. The provision of an outdoor arena removes those limitations and provides a permeable surface that can be used all year round. The proposed outdoor arena would have the minimum impact on the character of the site and openness of the greenbelt. The equine land use is acknowledged by the local authority upon their site visits and mentioned in the officer's report for replacement stables. In application 2019-1824, the local authority in permitting the stables have accepted that the applicant's private equestrian use for outdoor sport and recreation is not inappropriate in the green belt. The proposal does not result in fragmentation of an agricultural holding, but maintains its use as a private equestrian use. The scheme has been designed with utmost sensitivity for the local area as the client is a committed conservationist. The additional landscape and planting scheme is hugely eco-positive, as highlighted by the Surrey Hills Trust. Biodiversity enhancements can be made with native planting, bird boxes and log piles, all of which will be permeable. The fencing could be replaced with a native hedge if that was regarded as appropriate by the committee. All around the Hascombe Road area, there are equestrian facilities of varying sizes, which support the local community and small businesses, and which have traditionally relied upon the local equine community. The creation of new jobs linked to the continued use of the homes at equestrian facilities comes at a difficult time for the local economy and is a further positive feature. The council is right to raise the concern of visual impact and neighbouring amenity. The officer's report hopefully allays these concerns. But in addition, the applicant also suggests addressing this point further, swapping post-remote fencing for further native hedgerow plantation. The applicant's proposal is sensitive and compliant with national and local planning policies, and I trust the committee will recommend consent. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Okay, I think we move now to the debate. Yes. So any member wishes to make comment to this? Councillor Darcy.
Yeah, I suppose I should comment since I was the one who called it in. I'd just like to draw your attention to the Busbridge Parish Council submission, in which they raise the issue of the policy that we have, which specifically addresses non-commercial horse stuff, horse keeping. And it's got three provisions. Essentially, they are whether it should be small in scale, appropriate to the area. That's the number one. Second one is it should not detract from the character of the landscape. And the third one is it should not give rise to significant noise and disturbance or adversely affect residential amenity. Now, Busbridge Council would argue, and I think I would tend to agree with them, that it isn't small in scale. It's quite large, that it does significantly detract from the character of the landscape, and also that it would adversely affect amenity. So I thought it would be worthwhile having this discussion. That there is also, to me, there's a clear biodiversity loss. It's interesting that the spokesman that we just heard has suggested that they might put hedge boundary instead of fence. That's the sort of first thing I've seen which has any concession towards biodiversity, which is welcome. But the loss of 1,200 square metres of healthy living soil to replace it with what effectively is a mixture of sand and microplastic, that is certainly a damage to biodiversity, quite a substantial damage to biodiversity, and potentially policing as well. So I thought that was worth mentioning. There's also my concern about water use, because I believe they have to water these arenas to keep them in a good condition, unless they're waxed or polymer based. I don't know which one this is going to be, but there is a potential for the requirement to use water. And again, I don't know whether that's an issue that we should worry about, but we normally worry about that for housing. So I would have thought that it is consideration in a water stressed area. Anyway, that's my point of view. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Seaborn.
Thank you, Chairman. Although the papers say this item was called in by my fellow ward member, Councillor Darcy, I fully supported his request, largely because the issues in front of us are very much a matter of balance, and I felt it was appropriate for a broader group to consider them. To me, there are three issues that have already been mentioned, and I'll just put my perspective on them. Firstly, there's the forceful objections to the application from neighbours concerning harm to the boundary trees and hedging and the potential for noise and light intrusion. There's the issue that Councillor Darcy raised around Safe Policy RD 13 on non-commercial horse riding, which requires judgment on scale. And then the third matter, which the objector brought up, but doesn't appear in our papers, but does relate to consistent adjudication, is the fact that an application for a similar size sand school located less than 1 kilometre from Arlo Banks was turned down in 2018. I'll skirt through the first 2 points because, in my opinion, the officer report deals with them pretty satisfactorily. I fully understand the grounds for neighbour concern, and I think, to me, it's a matter of can they be dealt with in the conditions, and they are covered in the conditions. Condition 2 limits the use of the school to private use. Condition 4 precludes lighting and loudspeakers. So it's a matter of judgment for the committee whether those are that provides adequate protection. But I think the matter has been discussed, and it's for members to adjudicate. Second point in relation to Safe Policy RD13 on non-commercial horsekeeping, again, boils down to a question of judgment on scale. And I found that quite difficult because we get asked to make a judgment on the basis of words rather than numbers. What is scale? Given that this is going to be for private use and is conditioned for that, my inclination is to say that this doesn't contravene the policy. But again, it's a matter of balance. And then the third point relates to the 2018 application, WA 2018-0674, which is also in Busbridge Parish and was for a sand school at Lodkin Hill, which is less than 1 kilometre to the east of Arlo Banks. And that application was refused for 3 reasons, essentially relating to size, scale and failure to preserve openness. Firstly, in the Greenbelt, secondly, in the AONB, and thirdly, in the AGLV. The fundamental difference between Arlo Banks and the Lodkin Hill site is that the Lodkin Hill site is much more visible, particularly when looking south from Winkworth Arboretum. So the visibility issue was actually considered in 2 of the 3 grounds for refusal on that, but not the first. So, that we have a refusal with a condition in it that could be applied here. I suspect it might have been an oversight that the visibility issue wasn't brought into play on that one. But again, I think it's an issue that members should be looking at. So I struggle with this one, which is why I welcome the opinion of colleagues. I am at the moment minded to support the Office of Recommendation, but I'm equally open to be persuaded if others have strong counter arguments that could persuade me in a different direction. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Follows.
Thank you, Chair. I think that the first point that Councillor Darcy made in terms of RD13, that is, of course, a matter of judgment at the moment. I would be minded to say that the mitigations are not acceptable under RD13 for me. But actually, the bit I would want to really look at is the Greenbelt, because whoever, regardless of who owns the land, things like the biodiversity of the land itself is a community asset, effectively. And so when we're looking at Greenbelt removals, there's usually a developer coming in trying to justify a community benefit that makes that okay. And sometimes there are things that I'm quite amenable to look at in that capacity. So if somebody's going to come and say they're going to build a lot of affordable and social housing, certainly I think there is a time and a place to consider that sort of removal from the Greenbelt. But in this case, it's effectively removing community biodiversity to replace with a private asset. So I'm at the moment not minded to support it because I don't believe it offers any community benefit to outweigh the harm for the loss of the Greenbelt. So that's where I currently stand, unless otherwise convinced by other members of the committee. Thank you.
Councillor Goodridge.
Thank you, Chairman. Can I say firstly that I have some knowledge about sand schools, as my wife used to own a horse and we have a sand school at home in the Greenbelt. And therefore, to say that you shouldn't put sand schools in the Greenbelt unless there's public benefit can't be right, because Waverley's granted them in this neck of the woods. I think it would be helpful when we're talking about size that a competitive dressage horse competes in an arena that's 60 by 20. And therefore, if you're training in dressage at a reasonable level, you need a schooling ring of that size. So it's not a total coincidence that it's the size that's being asked for. I can't speak so much about show jumping, but I can on dressage. So I've looked at the report very carefully, and a lot of the comments concerning its position, screening, and so on that Councillor Seaborn mentioned are things with which I agree. And certainly at the moment, I'm minded to go with the officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Townsend.
Thank you, Chairman. I must admit that I think the 60 by 20 would be required for a lot of jumping. I think the 40 by 20, which is probably the average size, is more for just trotting about. so this is a normal size for somebody, I think, that wants to do a lot of jumping. One of the things that I looked at was the AONB planning advisor's response, which was actually only loaded onto the portal today, although it was dated the 26th of May. And I just would like to ask officers, I mean, there's some really good conditions that they suggest there, which may allay people's fears, and one of them is suggesting that in order so that it's not so visible, that it's sections are set into the ground so it's not so high. The other thing that is that there will be no coloured jumps, and I don't know how practical that is, but there are no coloured jumps. And the other thing was about the native species, the informal planting scheme. We've got the no lighting. So I just wondered whether or not it would be possible perhaps to have those conditions on this. The other thing that I noticed was that there is obviously there is something about no light and no loudspeakers, but then there is also then condition 5, which says that any external lighting should comply, and that seems to sort of not really meet condition 4, which says no artificial light. So I just wanted a clarification if those two conditions sort of conflicted slightly. I am a bit concerned about the wildlife on the site. There seems to be, you know, an awful lot of biodiversity that would be removed by what is quite an inert surface. And it is a big sand school. There's no doubt about that. It's, you know, the bigger ones in order to carry out, I presume, the needs of the client. But first of all, just perhaps some officers could just advise me whether or not those conditions could be added, and whether or not 4 and 5 sort of conflict. Thank you.
I thought, so your hand's probably been up for a while. Do you want to come in on? You may have a different point to make, but perhaps you could do that before we take Councillor Townsend's questions.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. And I will pass Councillor Townsend's questions over to Tracy, because it has been the subject of much discussion between officers. I just wanted to go back to Councillor Follows's comments about the community benefits surrounding biodiversity. Now, those are the sorts of, that's the sort of thing we would normally look at if we were considering very special circumstances, because we had found the development to constitute an appropriate development. And actually, we consider as officers the development to consider appropriate development in this instance, pursuant to one of the exceptions set out on para 145 of the NPPF, which is the provision of appropriate facilities for outdoor sport and outdoor recreation, as long as the facilities preserve the openness of the greenbelt. So we consider the openness is preserved, and it does fit within one of those exceptions. So there is no need for us to then go on to consider those very special circumstances at this juncture. I just thought I'd clarify that at that juncture. Thank you.
So, Tracy, do you want to comment on the additional potential conditions, I think, that Councillor Townsend was suggesting? Is Tracy there? You lost Tracy.
No, I'm here still. Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Townsend, yes, I agree that there is some conflict between conditions 4 and 5. I would be happy to remove condition 5, as condition 4 does state that there should be no lighting, therefore condition 5 is not necessary. In terms of the conditions set out by Clive, the AONB advisor, with the jumps, condition to secure jumps only being in a certain colour would be, well, it would not satisfy the 6 tests. Jumps in themselves are not development, as they're removable. They could be seen as temporary structures, but also you wouldn't be able to enforce the variation of colour. It's not therefore reasonable or necessary. And in regards to the levelling of the ground, it's a somewhat of a judgment. In assessing the application, by the level proposed to be raised in the western corner is due to be raised or proposed to be raised 1.1 metre. So that only affects that western corner. If you're then thinking about not raising that so high and lowering the eastern corner, you're then developing the whole land just to have a piece of level land within the field. And therefore the harm would be no less. Also, in relation to the stables, which are in the towards the eastern side of the site, you wouldn't come out of a stable and then sort of decrease down any sort of gradient with a horse to get to the sand school. So the level is sort of depicted from the level of the stables at present. Thank you.
Presumably the point about native species and planting scheme, we may come to a condition later about the boundary hedge rather than a fence. So I suppose the native species point can be picked up at that point. We aren't there yet. Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Chair. Having been born and brought up in the countryside and having ridden, I like the idea, and we must accept that such sand schools are appropriate in the countryside. It's part of the countryside and the countryside activities. But my big concern is the size of what we're supposed to be considering a sand school has been changed to an outdoor arena. So I'm rather concerned about the size and the height. I'm not concerned about the colour of the jumps, but I do think that the whole school could be repositioned. I don't know if there's a flatter site or if work has already started, but you know, it's going to be a considerable height above the neighbouring properties. That's what concerns me, more than the actual building of a sand school itself. And I recognise that because of the nature of the work that's going to be done with the horses and maybe the competitive work, they do need a larger area. But I still am concerned that maybe the stables should not be considered in relation to the plot, because horses can always be walked to stables. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. My part, I mean, if the site is wrong in your opinion, then I think you have to vote against. I mean, the site proposed is of course the site proposed. Councillor Wilson.
Just one thing that I'd like to go back to. A sand school, the surface, Councillor Darcy said microplastic. Is that a mixture of sand and plastic? I mean, what is it composed of? Because if it's something that shouldn't be there, then I'd ask, have we any control on the surface that they put in, if it would be doing any damage to the environment?
I presume the sand is over a plastic membrane, but Tracy, can you clarify that?
I believe there is a membrane. However, I wouldn't have thought that would be unlike any other membrane that you would lay a patio on or something like that. I should think that there would be their own industry standards which would secure details like this. And also there has been details that there would be a type 3 subbase, and then there would be a beige sort of a carpet, the exact composition of which I'm not sure of, and then sand on top. But I would have thought, and I mean, a condition could secure the details to be submitted to Waverley Borough Council for the exact sort of composition of the sand school. However, you would think that that would sort of be secured with its own industry standards or recommendations. They wouldn't put a substance down that would be harmful to horse or rider.
Okay, I think we can try and move to a vote on this. Councillor Townsend, you wish to make another comment?
It was just that, I mean, I think you'll find that equestrian sand is equestrian sand, so it does have some kind of rubber particles in it, you know. So I think I don't think that has some kind of particles in it. It does. It's not just sand. But I'm not sure if we can condition that. Then fine. If it's something more environmental.
I seem to have identified there's two potential additional conditions. The first is just that one, that the sand school be developed to industry standards, and the second was that, if I understand it, the applicant is proposing that stating that they would accept a condition to that the fence be replaced by a hedge, including native species. So perhaps we could include a condition that the planting scheme for that hedge would be agreed with the council before development. So I'm proposing that as an additional condition. I think it's 2 then. Is it probably 10 and 11? That 10 is the sand school should meet industry standards, and number 11, which is the planting scheme and the hedge design, be agreed with the Borough Council.
Chair, if I may, I believe condition 5 was agreed to be struck out as well.
That's correct. Yes, it's written down here, and to remove condition 5. Thank you. I think we've debated this. Perhaps we can move to the vote. So the vote is that permission be granted subject to conditions 1 to 4 and 6 to 9. 6 to 11, and informatives 1 and 2. So the vote is 4 is to grant permission.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll just share the results there. That's 10 votes in favour, 5 against, no abstentions. So that recommendation is passed.
Thank you. So item 10, there's no reason to exclude press and public, I believe, Georgina. So that was item 10. So there's nothing to do on that, and no legal advice I'm aware of. So I believe that's the end of the meeting. Thank you for members' investment and also time into that meeting. Thank you. And cheerio.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.